There you go.
Já está online, já está transmitindo. Okay, can we start? Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for coming, for the ones who are here in the auditorium with us. You are pretty much welcome. Thanks for receiving us here in your institution. We are very glad to promote this activity here, not only for you who are here in person, but for those who are online following us. I'd like to thank the U.S. Embassy and the American Consulates for the opportunity of bringing us a language specialist, Professor Viviana Cortes. I'm going to shortly read her biography before we get started. Viviana Cortes has been working at the CETLOE, is that right? CETLOE, okay. Since 2013, where she coordinates the teacher training program for international teaching assistants. She's a professor in the Department of Applied Linguistics and English as a Second Language. Her research interests include English grammar, corpus-based discourse analysis, formal-like language, and academic writing, as well as English for specific purposes and the use of English as a medium of instruction. She received a Fulbright International Scholar Award in 2022 to conduct a research study abroad about the English language needs of students and faculty in higher education in Brazil in the spring of 2023. She has presented her research at numerous local and international conferences. She has co-edited 2 books, and her research articles can be found in most top journals in the field. She's currently one of the editors of the English for Specific Purposes magazine. So, Viviana, thank you very much for coming, for dedicating your time to give a lecture for us today, either in the morning and afternoon. So we are very glad to receive you here at Unesp.
Thank you so much. I hope everybody can hear me. I apologize for this terrible cold I have, but I'm going to make an effort so that everybody can hear me, and I'm going to be standing. So today I am going to talk a little bit about how language patterns can help novice writers when they are starting to complete academic writing tasks in higher education. But before that, I'm going to tell you that you are going to be photographed. So your pictures are going to be used by the English language programs anywhere they want. So if you have any problem with being photographed, just let me know at the end of the talk, okay? Before I start, well, first of all, this is the outline of the presentation that I prepared for today. I'm going to start with some introductions, meaning me. I want to introduce myself to you so that you know a little bit more about me. And then we are going to go and see some perspectives of academic writing that are very general, and we'll go from general to specific, going first to genre-based studies, looking at communicative intentions in academic writing, and moves, rhetorical moves and steps. And then we are going to go into corpus-based perceptions, a perspective on academic writing, and that's when I'm going to talk about these language patterns, okay, this formulaic language. And then finally, some ideas on how these things can help novice writers when they are completing their academic tasks. So for those of you who don't know, I was born and raised in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And I did my undergraduate studies in Buenos Aires at the Universidad Tecnológica Nacional, which is a public university that has campuses all over the country, okay? More or less like Unesp that has campuses all over Sao Paulo state. And I worked in Buenos Aires in every single level of education you can think of. I was an elementary school teacher, I was a high school teacher, I was a teacher trainer, okay? And I also worked at the American-Argentinian Binational Center in Buenos Aires, that's called ICANA, for many years. But then I decided to continue my studies, and I did a master's program in California State University in Los Angeles. And it was a master's in teaching English as a second language. So there are some differences between teaching English as a second language and teaching English as a foreign language. So those were things that I had to get used to. And finally, I decided to pursue a PhD, for which I moved to that beautiful place in the mountains, which is Flagstaff, Arizona. So when we think of Arizona, we always think of the desert, but that's in the mountains, so it's really, really beautiful. And I worked there in the corpus linguistics project, and that's when I became a corpus-based discourse analyst. My first job in the United States was at Iowa State University, which is a wonderful university in Iowa, but I come from a big city, of course, no comparison with Sao Paulo, but Buenos Aires is big too. And I really don't like cold weather, and Iowa State University is in Ames, which is a very, very small town, probably smaller than the population of this university. Okay, so probably 40,000 people. And it's in a place that has very cruel, very crude winters. Winter starts in October and finishes in May, and the temperature can be 25 degrees below zero. So I really couldn't continue living there. And even though it was a wonderful job, I decided to start looking for another one. And I got my current job in Atlanta, Georgia, in the southern part of the United States. The weather is milder. The program is nice. I have a lot of graduate students in applied linguistics. And as Sandra said, in 2022, I got an International Scholar Award by Fulbright. And I was living here in Sao Paulo for 4 months, and I did a study of needs analysis of students and faculty in programs of English for academic purposes and programs that use English as a medium of instruction, okay? I was the editor-in-chief of English for Specific Purposes. I stepped down on January 1st, 2025. I worked for 10 years, and I thought that it was enough service for me. So now that you know a little bit more about me, I'm gonna start with our presentation. First, I wanna go over general aspects of academic writing, and some differences between perception and reality. So I have here some statements, and I would like you to read them and think whether these statements are true or false. And I'm gonna ask you to answer, and if you cannot answer, I will answer. But if you say it's true, you have to tell me why. If you say it's false, you have to account for your choice, okay? Take a minute, read them, and let me know which ones you think are true and which ones you think are false, and why. Okay, do you think we can start with the first one? It says, academic writing tasks are more demanding than other types of writing. What do you think? You think it's true? Have you experienced that when you have to write something for your classes that is more difficult? Okay, does anybody know why it's perceived as more difficult? Do you have any idea? Okay, we'll go into that, okay, in the presentation today. Let's go to the second one. And the second one says, let me get here because I can read better. Following a fixed formula is enough to succeed in academic writing tasks. What do you think? Why do you think it's false? Do people agree that it's false? Wouldn't it be nice if we had a formula and we could use it to write everything we want in academic writing? Yeah, it's false. I mean, there are things that are conventional in academic writing, but there is no fixed formula. Okay. Academic writing tasks require a strong critical thinking and organizational skills. What do you think? They do. Okay, so it's like probably those are two of the qualities of academic writing tasks, that you have to think critically and that you have to follow a certain organization. Academic writing tasks can be completed successfully without engaging with sources or evidence. That's false, okay? In fact, for every single claim that you make, you need some support. So you really need a source, or you need some evidence that supports that claim. And academic writing tasks are necessary for developing professionally and scholarly communication skills. What do you think? Can you successfully become an academic if you don't do academic writing tasks? No. Okay, so it's like they are part of the answers, and we can continue. These are very general statements about academic writing that, as you can see, I took from the literature. So academic writing is typically more lexically dense and more syntactically, structurally complex than other written registers. And that is one of the reasons why it's more difficult than other types of writing. So it's like the first statement that we did in the true-false said that academic writing tasks are perceived as more difficult by students. Well, the idea is it is more lexically dense and structurally complex. Lexically dense means that the vocabulary used carries a lot of information. And so usually the lexical items that carry a lot of information are nouns. And when you read academic tasks, academic articles, reports, even textbooks, you're going to see that there is a lot of noun use, nominal use. And those nouns carry a lot of information. And you know that in English, when you put nouns together, you get very sophisticated structures. You get a noun modifying another noun, modifying another noun, and modifying another noun, and you really don't know in the end what is modifying what, okay? So it's like in Portuguese, like in Spanish, we have a lot of post-modification of the noun, okay? And in English, you have pre-modification, and that is something that you need to really digest the relationship between those nouns to understand. And the same happens with the structures. You get post-modification of nouns with the structures that compress a lot of information, like these reduce clauses, okay, like to clauses or ing clauses or ed clauses that post-modify the nouns. Successful academic writing requires control of discipline-specific conventions which vary across fields of study. And this is very important to understand because when you write in academia, you are writing to become a member of a specific academic community, okay? And so you need to follow the same trends that the people of that community use so that you become a member of that community. So someone in physics is going to write very different from someone in psychology because they are different academic communities and they have their own patterns and they have their own organization. And if you want to become a member of one of those two, you have to follow whatever they do. Writers often struggle with academic writing tasks because of difficulties in organizing ideas and structuring arguments. And this happens very often, okay? And the idea is you have to be smart when you read, okay? So when you read materials in your discipline, not only read for content, read for form. How are these authors communicating their ideas? What structures are they using? Which organization are they using? So then when you write your papers, you can follow those models. Novice writers frequently underuse citation practices, even though integrating sources is central to academic writing. So, as I said before, when you make a claim in academic writing, you need support. You either need evidence from your own studies, or you need to cite someone else who did those studies. So it's like no claim should go unsupported in academic writing. I mean, I'm sure that if you write something for your teacher and you don't support your claim, your teacher's going to write something that says unsupported claim. Okay, so where's your citation? Said who? Okay, so it's like, who says this? Now, instruction and feedback play a critical role in helping students develop academic writing competence. And this is something that you need to get used to being criticized. So the idea is academic writing is a process, and you need to learn from the process of writing, being criticized, and improving your writing. That happens even when you are an academic and you submit a paper to a journal. Reviewers are going to criticize your work if the work has any issues in order to improve the paper. So there is this idea that in many cultures you have that writing is a product, but in fact academic writing, particularly in English, is a process. So you need to pay attention to the process and all the feedback that you can get in that process. And finally, academic writing is perceived by many students as one of the most challenging aspects of higher education. But this is in any language, okay? So it's like when you write an academic task, you are writing a new language, even if you're writing in Portuguese or if you're writing in Spanish, and if you're writing in your first language. So when you're writing in an additional language, sometimes the difficulties are higher. Okay, so let's look at research writing. So when I started my graduate studies, I started to read research articles in applied linguistics because that is my field, okay? And I, unfortunately, never took any class about English for academic purposes. So all the discoveries that I made on how people write academic papers in English was something that I did on my own. That is very painful. So if you have the chance of taking a class in which people show you how papers are written in your discipline, please do, because it helps a lot. So let's have a look at some general traits of research writing. When you are writing a piece of anything, you have a purpose, okay? You want to communicate something. We call that the communicative intention or the communicative purpose of the writer. So there was a professor who unfortunately passed away last year. His name is John Swales, and he started in 1981 to study the communicative purposes of authors when they were writing introduction sections to their research papers. So what he did is he collected a corpus of papers, that is a group of papers, of introductions, and he started analyzing to see if there was any trend, okay, if there was any intention that repeated from paper to paper. And he did find that, in fact, introductions, even across disciplines, follow certain purposes, okay? And that when you write, it helps you to know that there is a certain development on the introduction. However, it's even more important when you read, because if you know that there is a certain order of the communicative functions of an introduction, then you are going to be expecting that communicative intention from the author. As an editor of a journal, I was pretty much expecting a very organized introduction that told me how what the paper was going to be about and how the study was going to be organized. When someone becomes very creative in academic writing, it's really not a positive trait, because the idea is the people in your field write like this, you are supposed to follow the same tendency. So John Swales created a scheme, okay, that is called moves and steps scheme, in which he identified the most frequent communicative functions, communicative purposes of writers when they write the introduction to a research article. This is for articles that are divided into introduction, methods, results, and discussion. Because there are articles that are different with different organization, but if you have articles that follow that IMRD structure, the introductions usually follow the tendency. So he designed this scheme. When he started in 1981, he used a small number of introductions, probably around 50, but his study has been replicated many times with hundreds and hundreds of thousands. Because when he started in 1981, there was no way of studying texts like numerous texts. But with the advancements of computers and corpus-based analysis, nowadays there are things that you can do to analyze language across hundreds of thousands of texts. So his study has been replicated. First, he looked at the organizational pattern of the introductions, and then he looked at the most frequent linguistic features in those communicative purposes, communicative sections of the introduction. He did this manually, okay? So with the 50 papers that were hard copies, okay? In this 1981, very little computers. In fact, to be very honest with you, I got a copy of the publication that he did, and it was like a paper copy, a photocopy, and it was typed on a typewriter. Okay, no computer. I still have that copy. Okay, it's like for a museum. Okay, so now let's have a look at this introduction. So this is a very, very short introduction that I chose for that reason, because it's short. And so we can put it all in only one slide. What I would like you to do is to read this to see if together we can identify the different purposes, the different intentions that the author had when he wrote this introduction. Okay, so I want you to take 2 minutes to go over it, and then we're going to work together to see if we can discover what the purposes are in this introduction. Okay? You can sit in this one, so that you can. So let's start with the first paragraph. The first paragraph has a couple of intentions. Who can tell me something? What is this author trying to do when he starts this introduction? Yes, absolutely. Importance of what? Of what? Importance, what is important in this paragraph or in this article? Exactly, the subject that is going to be discussed, and he's trying to highlight the centrality, the importance of this aspect. Don't forget that you are trying to have your reader continue reading. So you really need to highlight that, first of all, you show what is the area that you are going to talk about, and then you try to catch your reader's attention by explaining why it is important or central to discuss this or analyze this. Okay, what else? There are some other things that are done in that paragraph. Exactly, because I mean, you need some support. You are not the only one. You're not alone in this. The author is not alone. Some other people have also thought that this topic was important, okay, and it was central. People have been doing research on this. So it's like, okay, we are a community. We think that this is important. Now we are going to try to convince you that this is important. Let's go on to the second paragraph. What is the second paragraph doing? Yes, so all this has been done. But now something is missing, okay? A lack, exactly. And what is the last paragraph? What's happening in the last paragraph? What is the writer trying to do? Speak up, I can hear. So this is what he's trying to do, okay? He's presenting the current study. So in short, these are the three moves of all introductions. At the beginning, the author establishes the territory, and it does several things by establishing the territory, the ones that we analyze, but let's go from general to specific. Then he tries to identify a niche, a lack, something that is still needed. And how is he going to fill in that niche? With his own study. Okay, so he's going to occupy the niche with his own study. So in the first move, we have, in fact, 3 steps. And as you very well said, the first one is claiming centrality, where you try to convince your readership that what you are talking about is important, okay? One way or the other. You make topic generalizations because the introduction goes from general to specific. And you review items of previous research. So all those 3 things are, in fact, in the short introduction that I chose to show you. You have in the first sentence, the author is claiming centrality. In the second sentence, it's making topic generalizations. And in the last sentence, it is presenting previous research. So it's like a perfect introduction by the book, okay? Now, in the second move, as we say, it's establishing a niche. And you can establish a niche by doing different things. You can counterclaim, okay? So it's like you present a claim at the beginning, but then you counterclaim, or you can indicate a gap, as you said, a lack, or you can raise a question. So sometimes there are some questions in the introduction that are also indicating that niche. In our example, there was a gap, okay? So our second paragraph was indicating the gap in the field. And in the third move, occupying a niche, this one has a lot of steps, but I only rescued the most important, 1, 2, and 3. And one is outlining the purposes or announcing present research, and then announcing some findings and indicating the article structure. And in our short example, we have that the author is outlining the purpose because he says, okay, the purpose of this study, okay, And then he announces some findings, because it says that report key differences in collaborative trajectories. And finally, indicating the article structure, concluding with the implications for designing more inclusive online learning environments. So those moves and steps give you some organization of the introduction that can help a lot when you write. However, my advice is use this scheme when you read. When you read papers in your discipline, try to see if you can identify this structure, because that is going to also give you ideas of the language that the authors in your discipline use when they are communicating those purposes. Now, as I told you, I wanted to talk about formulaic language. So in 2013, even before that, I was doing a study for something else, but I had collected many introductions of research articles in 13 different disciplines. And for many years, I have been studying lexical bundles. Lexical bundles are expressions of 3 or more words that occur very frequently in a register. They are very specific expressions. They are groups of 3 or 4 words, but because of the way in which they are identified, because it's a computer program that runs through the text without any preconception or intuition, the expressions are not complete units, okay? You have expressions like, for example, as a result of. So it's a prepositional phrase with an embedded fragment of another prepositional phrase. So many lexical bundles are not complete units, but they do have very specific functions in discourse. I started analyzing lexical bundles when I was a PhD student, so more than 20 years ago. And I find them fantastic building blocks, because when you learn the functions of these lexical bundles, you can use them to link very heavy information units. And in fact, many authors have considered lexical bundles building blocks. So they are not complete units, as I said, but they are classified according to their structural correlates. For example, you can say, as a result of, is in the group of prepositional phrase bundles, so it's in the group of phrasal bundles. While, for example, which one could be? That it is, or as, no, as would be another prepositional phrase. I want to find one with a verb. If you have a verb phrase fragment, you are going to have a clausal bundle. So usually you first separate them between phrasal and clausal, and then you go into subcategories. The most important thing, however, about bundles is their frequency, because they are very frequent, and their function. So after studying them for a long time, remember that I was doing this study with introductions, I decided to look at particular bundles that were used in research article introductions to see if I could match the bundle and the move. Okay? It was just an idea. I didn't know if it was going to work, but it did. And so I did that study, and then I replicated the study with other sections of the research article. I've done it in method sections, and then in results sections with 2 of my students. So I can show you bundles that correspond one-on-one with a particular move and a particular step. So in move 1, step 1, when you claim centrality, when you want to say how important this area of inquiry is, you can use expressions like a great deal of, one of the, or one of the most, one of the major. As you can see, you are using all these superlatives, okay, so that you indicate the centrality. The most important, play an important role, the importance of the. These expressions appeared hundreds of times in my corpus. My corpus had 1,400 introductions, because in order to identify lexical bundles, you need your corpus to have a lot of words. And you know, introductions are usually short, so you're gonna need many introductions to get to 1 million words, and that's what I wanted, 1 million words. So in the second step, making topic generalizations, you have expressions that are, like, for example, shown, with shown, has been shown, have been shown, has been shown to be, it is well known, something about the development, because in fact, you want to generalize the study, okay, and the area in which the study is being developed. And finally, for reviewing items of previous research, you have expressions like, it has been suggested that, it was found that, referred as the, studies have been shown. As you can see, for this particular study, I looked at expressions from 4 words till 9 words. So there were expressions that were shorter and expressions that were longer, but all of them had a very different function, and those expressions, each of them was tied to a particular step. So have a look at an example. This is move to step 1. This is the first one. Let me see. Establish a territory. Yes. Move to. Let's look at an example in context, okay? So here we have indicating a gap. And these are bundles that are always used to indicate a gap in the introduction. It is necessary to, little is known about, there is a need to. So isn't it nice that now we know that we can use one of those expressions to indicate the gap? And we are not doing anything strange, because a lot of authors are using those. Okay, so it's like you are using what everybody else is using. And in a way, it's expected. So you can see there is, so for 1A, you have all those. And for 1B, which is indicating, adding to what is known, you have, it should be noted that the effects of there are a number of. And then you can also do a step 2 in the move, in move 2, which is presenting positive justification. And you have a better understanding of, a better understanding of the, is known about. You have little is known about, again, and there is a need to, that can be also used to present positive justification. Or for example, in move 3, when you are occupying the niche, you have a step 1, A and B, with expressions like the purpose of the present study, the aim of the study. The aim of the study is to determine, that are used dozens of times by authors in introductions from different disciplines, okay? We show that, in this paper we show that. Then you can use, you can announce some principal findings in a step 2, in an increase in the results of, the findings in the case of, in relation to, and finally, indicating the article structure. And here you have are present in section and the number of the section, at the end of the section, in the next section. The paper is organized as follows. This paper is organized as follows. The remainder of the paper is organized as follows. So it's like all those expressions were used by the authors of the papers in my corpus to show the reader how the paper was going to be organized. Here you have one example from the corpus of the bundle little is known about, used in move 2 step 1 to indicate the gap. So Hispanic children who are developing both their first and second language skills may also exhibit differences in performance on narrative production and comprehension tasks, which might partially explain their performance on recall and comprehension of written narratives in school. However, little is known about the narrative skills of Spanish-speaking children who are in the process of becoming bilingual in English. So that is the gap. That is probably some of the things that this paper is going to be doing. But we don't know that yet, because that would come in move 3. And this one is move 3, step 3, which is the organization of the paper. This is a paper from statistics, and the move starts with the remainder of the paper is organized as follows. Section 2 contains a brief description of the class disparities in general. Section 3, in section 3 we discuss this. In section 4 presents numerical results. Okay, so it's like you are telling the reader exactly where certain information is being located in the paper. Now, how can this help you guys with your writing, okay? Well, the idea is to merge the communicative purpose and the linguistic features that are frequently used to communicate that purpose. So, in academic writing, it's first of all essential to identify the communicative purpose. That is, what you want to express. And when you're reading, what the writer is trying to express. What is the writer's intention? So when you are writing, you have to first realize what you are trying to communicate, what you are trying to accomplish with your writing. The second thing, it is important to be aware of a specific language that can help you communicate that intention. So now you know that there are some expressions out there that people use to communicate a particular intention. So my advice is usually when you read for content, but also read for format. Just try to identify the intention of the author and then with which language the author is communicating his or her intention, okay? Pay attention to the functions and the structures and vocabulary using the text that you read. Because in a way, we usually try to teach our students to write, but in many cases, that writing instruction is separated from reading, and it shouldn't be like that. I apologize. And so you can use those functions and structures that you identify as models that you can use in your own writing. And that's all I have for you, but I'm open to questions. Don't be shy, please.
Thank you so much, Viviana, for your enlightening lecture on how to improve academic writing. We have a couple of questions from online participants.
Wonderful.
But before that, is there anyone here in person that would like to pose a question? Okay, let me give you the microphone.
Thank you, Professor, for the presentation. So these lexical bundles, they're very general. So do they vary with the area of knowledge of the paper, their frequency?
There are some bundles that are specific to some disciplines. But in introductions, there are more similarities than differences, because the introduction is the more stable section across disciplines. That's why it was not so difficult for Swales to create that scheme, because he worked with papers from very different disciplines, and he created the scheme. There may be some varieties, but they are very small. For example, the last step in Move 3, which is organizing the paper, telling your reader how the paper is organized. There are disciplines that don't have that step at all. That step is optional. But if you are in business, marketing, finance, that step is mandatory. Okay, so it's like there are differences. So then, because the step is optional, the bundles that come with the step only appear in the frequently, they only appear in the disciplines that have that move as a mandatory move. However, you may find expressions that show the organization of the paper in other disciplines, but not in a frequency that is going to help those expressions become bundles. Because remember that a bundle is a group of words that repeats. Did I answer your question? Okay, cool. Okay. It's not working?
It stopped working, I think.
Oh, it's not working. I'll use this one too. Go.
So there was a moment in your presentation that you said that there are ways to be more creative when writing, and then you presented all these structures for the introduction. So I want to ask you, how can this be?
No, I didn't say you need to be more creative. You can be, but you shouldn't.
No. I'm not saying that you said that you should be creative, but I think, like, you said that there are ways to be more creative.
Of course.
Yeah.
You know who is usually more creative? People who are more experienced. So they feel they have more power, and so they can write more creatively. But when you start writing, when you are a novice writer, the idea is you should do what the rest of the people are doing. There are many studies in applied linguistics that have analyzed the writing of novice writers and the writing of experienced writers, people who have been published a lot. And as you become more well-known in your field, you take some liberties, and you're going to be allowed to do that. But at the beginning, there is a route, okay, to follow, and the idea is you are not creative. You do what the rest of the people do. Why? Because when someone reads a research article, the person has an expectancy. There is a scheme in your mind on how the information is going to be organized. So when you write very creatively, that expectation is not met. And so then you are going to be told, consider organizing your introduction from general to specific, for example, because that's what everybody else does. Now, people who are very experienced maybe have more liberties and they can be allowed to write more creatively. But the idea is your readers, when you write a research article, have a scheme in mind, and when things start to become very creative and the organization becomes very unique, then the papers are not so positively regarded. Okay, because unfortunately, academic writing is fixed. It has this organization. Of course, you are going to use different language because you are communicating different content. But as you can see, there are a lot of commonalities, not only in the organization, but also in some of these expressions that repeat from paper to paper and from discipline to discipline to communicate very specific functions.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to ask if there's a way to combine this structure, that common structure, with some degree of creativity, maybe through training and practicing, like writing a lot. So
I think that academic writing is not expected as a creative way of writing, that it is pretty schematic.
Well, yeah, but...
So then, I mean, I'm not saying that you cannot write creatively. You can. However, you are going to find more difficulties when you try to write creatively in academia than when you write more schematically?
Yeah, of course. It's just because when I read a paper, like a lot of papers are very similar, as you said, but the papers that differ a little bit, that present some personality, these are the papers that I like to read.
Well, because, and I understand you perfectly, but those papers are usually written by people who have a lot of experience and are very well known in the field. For example, John Swales, he wrote papers and books in the first person, which is something that in academia, it's not. In applied linguistics, it's not something that is a tendency. However, he was John Swales, so he could do whatever he wanted, and people were really happy to make him publish in their journals or in their publishing companies. But when you start, like when I started with my articles, I was doing what the reviewers and the editors were telling me to do because nobody knew me. And so I wanted my articles to be published because I needed that to be promoted and to be better known and to spread the results of my studies. So I had to follow and change many things in my papers that probably I didn't agree 100% with. But in that way, I was sure that the paper was going to be published, and that was the purpose of my paper, that I needed it to be published. So I think that it cuts both ways to be creative, because I mean, it's risky when you are starting. Then when you are very well known, you can take the reviewers or the editors' commentaries as suggestions. But when you are just starting, you follow them as instructions, okay? Because you really want your paper to be published. And if you don't do what people tell you, I'm not gonna say that you're gonna change things that you think that are right. You can fight for your knowledge. But in the case of the writing style, probably it's safer to follow what everybody is doing. Okay.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Another question here? No? So we can move on to the online questions. The first question was from Carolina Stager-Quaggio. She first thanks Dr. Viviana for the talk, and she says, most international journals with a high impact factor have word requirements.
Number of words?
Yeah, she's gonna say that. Therefore, we must be able to clearly communicate complex, detailed research without using a great number of words. Does she, or do you, have any tips for reducing word count while maintaining essential content?
Oh, yeah, I understand perfectly, because usually they are very strict with the number of words. Particularly the first time that you submit a paper to a journal, you have to go below the number of words, because if the paper is sent out to reviewers and you're gonna have to change or add, the number of words is going to go up. And these days, all journals are online, so it's not a question of pages, because in the past, it was a financial reason why you had a number of words, because they didn't want to pay for more paper, okay, and more impression. But these days, it's just a standard that you have to communicate your research in a certain number of words. I think that following a scheme, the schemes for the sections can help you a lot in keeping the number of words. And it also depends on the type of research that you are reporting, because quantitative research is something that doesn't require so many words. But when you are reporting the results of qualitative research, those papers tend to require more words. So I say try to synthesize your findings to the best of your knowledge. And if you need a couple of hundred of extra words, just negotiate with the editor of the journal. Because, I mean, usually, if you tell the editor beforehand in a really nice letter of introduction, that you are 400 words or 500 words over the top, but that you tried, but you are reporting something that is very important and it requires certain number of extra words, I doubt that any editor is going to tell you, is going to reject the paper for that, okay? So it's like, probably it's something that can be negotiated. But my idea, my suggestion is like, try to synthesize the sections that are the longest sections, that usually is the discussion, for example, or the literature review, because sometimes authors go over and over with the literature review, and the literature review has to be a framework of reference that helps locate, situate your study in the whole spectrum of that area of research. So it's like, try to synthesize parts and summarize parts that would give you a little bit more space in the places that you need more words.
Okay, thank you. The other question that we have was posed by Almir Olivetti Arteiro. My question is, what do you think about the use of artificial intelligence, which is increasingly being used to write scientific articles?
Yeah, well, I mean, I cannot think anything because it's happening. So it's like, and there's no way that in this moment, there is no way to know when artificial intelligence has been used to write a paper. So you have to trust the system in a way. So I think that if a study is a really good study and the researcher is honest enough to say for which sections of the paper they use artificial intelligence, the system is gonna succeed. The system meaning the paper is gonna be sent out to reviewers and the paper is going to follow its logical process if the paper has to be published. However, there are things that are happening that are completely unethical. Like, for example, there are paper mills, meaning the group of researchers get together and they do a study and they write 20 different papers that are like, they have very, very tiny differences one from the other, but there is no computer program that can identify the overlap. So then I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple of years we have the same papers or very similar papers with the same study but different language published in different journals. Editors are really very, very worried about what is going on. So probably if things get really worse, there's going to have to be like a very drastic change in the publication industry, you know? So I really cannot tell you more than that. I mean, to me, artificial intelligence is a very important source for doing small tasks that take a long time. Like, for example, when you are creating materials for a class and you need, I don't know, true-false statements or questions or things like that, that you can give artificial intelligence, any bot, some instructions, good instructions, and work with the bot to see how those materials can be improved. But you have to remember one thing. Whatever you put on a bot is not yours anymore, because the bot is going to own that language. And whatever, imagine that you write an introduction and you put it on ChatGPT because you want to be given feedback. That introduction is now part of ChatGPT. So it's not yours anymore. Meaning, if you write another piece and you put on ChatGPT, ChatGPT is going to compare it to the previous one that you wrote, together with 100,000 more. So it's like becoming part of the database. And that is very dangerous, because the more of that you do, the less creative you are going to be able to be. So it's like the bigger imagine that you find a mistake with ChatGPT. If you correct it, ChatGPT doesn't make that mistake anymore, okay? Because it becomes part of the database. However, one thing that you need to take into consideration is that artificial intelligence is not generating language. So these days, everybody says it's like language generating processes. No, all they can generate is answers to a stimuli. So you have stimuli, you have a stimulus, and then they give you an answer. For now, they cannot generate new language. All the language that they give you is the language that they have. There's nothing new there. There's no creation of new language. So those are things that you really need to have, like, take into account when you use artificial intelligence.
Okay, thank you, Viviana, for answering that question. We have one more question and a couple of comments. The next question is from Paula Tavares Pinto, our colleague from São José do Rio Preto. And part of her question was already answered here in person, but the other part was, should authors diversify the bundles in their texts, or repeating them would help the author emphasize his or her main idea?
I think that it's up to the author, but when you are starting to write research articles and you don't have a lot of experience, using bundles can help you a lot organize your writing. When you become more experienced, then you can diversify more, okay? So you know different expressions that you can use for different communicative purposes. But at the very, very beginning, when you have never written a research article or an introduction to a report, knowing that you can follow that scheme and you have those expressions that go with the scheme, that can help you a lot. And using those bundles as building blocks and like that can connect different parts of different sources of information. So I think that at the beginning, it's going to be like more schematic, and the moment that you become more advanced in your writing, you become like you can diversify more, you can change those expressions.
Yeah, kind of your answer included what was going to be my question, like how could we use lexical bundles for academic writing, especially if we are beginners in writing in English, so kind of
yeah, I mean, I think that if you are teaching genre and you are teaching communicative purposes, teaching the communicative purpose with some bundles that help communicate that intention, that is very useful for the students. Not only bundles, of course, lexical items too, but I mean, the bundle, that formulaic expression gives a special flair to writing, okay? Because it's like you are using these expressions that all the other authors are using to convey that particular function. So that I think that gives certain prestige to your writing, because it's showing this idea of belonging. You belong to this academic community because you are using the same expressions.
Okay, thank you, Viviana. And here I have a couple of comments from online participants. Carolina, the first question that you answered, she said, thank you for the answers. I really appreciate really good tips. Rafael Menezes says, very nice, thank you for the lecture. Leticia Gabrieli said, very interesting, congratulations. And Hayani Lima said, I like the lecture a lot. I could expand my knowledge on the topic.
Okay, wonderful, thank you.
So if we don't have any other questions, either online or here in person, we can end the lecture. Again, I'd like to thank you, all the ones for coming. I'd like to thank the Instituto de Física Teórica here at Unesp in São Paulo, and also Viviana Cortes from Georgia University for being here with us this morning to give this enlightening lecture on how to improve our scientific writing. Thank you very much for all of you attending online and in person.